Excellent. Well, welcome everybody. Great to be back here again speaking. Thank you so much for joining our CAAM Town Hall. Bonjour tout le monde. And wow, just take a look at everybody here today. It's great to be back speaking with our entire ecosystem. Now, we want to make sure that we set the space before we launch into our content today. And in order to connect with all of us here, we want to start with two quick warm-up questions. So if you can go into the chat or the Q&A, please just post in number one for those who are traveling or staying at home this long weekend. Let us know which city and country you plan to be in. And number two, as we know, our size and diversity of the CAAM ecosystem continues to grow. Place a number between 1 and 10 in that Q&A or chat function for your level of expertise with the advanced air mobility industry. Let's set 10 as being an industry expert and 1 as being this first time that you've heard this event and this acronym for the new advanced air mobility side. Wonderful. Thanks so much, Danny. Great to have you here. Karen as well. Thank you. Oh, excellent on some of the Colorado side. Thank you, Angelica. Perfect. So just for some of the initial introductions, I wanted to make sure that I could pass on that my name is J.R. Hammond, and I'm privileged to serve as our current Executive Director for CAAM, our federal, not-for-profit, Canadian Advanced Air Mobility. Alongside me, we have our CAAM team with our Marketing Manager, David Dong, as well as our Chief of Staff, Theo Robson, who are running point behind the scenes on any of our technical challenges and opportunities for today at Zoom. So let's dive in. We're starting up this quarterly CAAM Town Hall again, bringing together our greater CAAM ecosystem and our growing future of aviation industry globally as well. Each of these town halls will feature some of the key updates in the field of advanced air mobility from both our national authorities, industry experts, and some of our funding partners as we strive to be your one-stop shop for advanced air mobility updates in Canada. 2024 for CAAM is the launch of our next 5-year plan towards operationalization. As the national authoritative voice for advanced air mobility in Canada, we are unifying the industry together in identifying opportunities, concerns, and challenges alongside as we spearhead the path towards operations here with our national authorities. We're grateful to have you here today, and thank you once again for your role in bringing this industry to operations. Now, we know that we're hosting this digital event on the unceded and traditional ancestral territories of the countless First Nations people across Canada. Collectively, as settlers, we recognize our duty and responsibility to decolonization, reconciliation, and the equitable inclusive use of our future air resources. Never before have these opportunities been more present, especially in spite of our current events, for our work in amplifying the reconciliation efforts within the advanced air mobility industry. We invite you to explore this artwork of the Indigenous land acknowledgement through Kuteen Creations in the Bead Your Province map. Our CAAM team will drop in the webinar chat for everyone to see some of the different opportunities for you to connect with where your beaded province has been across the Canadian side. So our overview for today in terms of our agenda is going to be an opportunity to create a consistent and recurring space in these town halls for regulatory updates and en route to operations in Canada through some of our funding partners. We'll begin by providing a quick overview of an introduction to our CAAM 2.0 model towards operationalization. Then we'll transition our conversation to Jeannie Stewart-Smith at Transport Canada for a regulatory and update Q&A. And lastly, we'll conclude the event with our funding partner of Michel, Dion, running the $350 million fund for the Initiative for Sustainable Aviation Technology, or INSAT. For any of today's audience engagement, we invite our attendees to submit your questions via the Q&A function throughout the session, and our CAAM team members will be able to respond both online and follow up offline for any questions or insights not answered during our fireside chat and question and answers. So at CAAM, our vision and purpose has only become more clear and defined with the growth of the advanced air mobility ecosystem globally. Simply put, at CAAM, we exist to assemble and build the Canadian advanced air mobility ecosystem well en route to operations. And when we focus on well, our well under the CAAM language means expediting Canada's transition to that zero emission aviation focus in line with ICAO's 2050 goals, bringing together a globally unique triforce of national authorities from Transport Canada, NAV Canada, and ourselves as the national not-for-profit in solving some of these challenges, being co-founded with the National Research Council of Canada, bringing that full weight of a strong, globally reputable research body, and of course, catalyzing the diverse, equitable, and inclusive workforce that we will need for the advanced air mobility future. Not only does this expand our 5-year strategy towards operationalization, but we look at the evolving definition as well. For us at CAAM, what is advanced air mobility? It is the evolution of our air transportation ecosystem enabled by new propulsion systems, new aircraft architecture, new operating missions, all together allowing people, goods, and services to move within urban and regional areas safely. This is played out in our ensuring that we work across the scope of operations and taking all of our partnerships from the RPAS and drone space and ensuring those learnings are not siloed, but playing out to our regional fixed wing, our urban vertical takeoff and landing, and our commercial aviation space. This expanded umbrella gives us the ability to have the maximum impact, not only in our advanced air mobility ecosystem, but our growing Canadian aerospace ecosystem. Over the past 5 years, we've developed an immense partnership across our international, national, and regional municipal partners, bringing the advocacy, skills development, research and innovation, various government partners, and of course, diversity, equity, inclusion groups who are all represented here today to understand they have a role to play in the advanced air mobility ecosystem, and they have support and alignment with us here at CAAM. Now we look back on our first 5 years, and our whole model was spent on education and awareness. How do we build up the insight towards the opportunities this new technology has in our ecosystem? We're now launching our CAAM 2.0 model towards operationalization. This is going to be spearheaded by the most recent announcement that we've had from Helijet in beta, supported by the Premier of British Columbia for their first purchase order of the Beta ALIA 250 electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. This is our first piece of tangibility, giving us that momentum towards operationalization. Here's a short little video to show some of the insight of what this tangibility will look like here in Canada.
As industries and nations around the world work to transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy, one of the most dynamic sectors in the forefront is the aerospace and aviation industry. It's an exciting time for aviation right now.
Today signifies a truly meaningful step toward a sustainable aviation future for all of us.
Today, I'm pleased to announce that Helijet will be on its way to becoming the first Canadian air carrier to provide passengers and cargo services using electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, following the placement of firm orders with the ALIA 250 eVTOL aircraft from Beta Technologies.
And this really exciting announcement for British Columbia is such a proud moment for us and actually for all of Canada.
5 years ago, we embarked on a journey in launching CAAM with a vision to bring advanced air mobility and zero-emission aviation to Canada.
I want to thank everybody at Helijet who had a role in this. I want to thank CAAM for being a champion at an organizational level, at the national level, around regulations to make sure that this works.
CAAM has created an impressive international ecosystem of more than 100 members from industry, academia, capital, and government.
This is just the start. We are now on the pathway towards operationalization, and in doing so, CAAM is launching our 2.0 model with our various new operating pillars to engage the ecosystem and create and spearhead that pathway towards operations. It all begins with our thought leadership efforts that will continue in bringing in our new and relevant players to the advanced air mobility ecosystem. We're then going to be continuing on with our ecosystem builder pillar, acting as that business development and connecting piece. And the intent is to develop our project catalyzer, utilizing the beta and helijet opportunity to start all of the existing CAD projects that will be necessary and required en route to operationalization. And then ensuring that we have a national strategy team in place to guide and give insights to how the development nationwide needs to play from the federal, provincial, municipal, and Indigenous levels. And then our last two operating pillars focus on how do we amplify the great work going on in Canada. We'll be launching our CAAM National Annual Event, giving space for Canadian companies and foreigners to see the insight going across the country and how we can display that on the international stage as well. And lastly, bringing our diverse, equitable, and inclusive workforce into the future. This is what we're focusing on. All of these come together under the CAAM operating pillars for our 2.0 model, focusing on that transition towards operationalization. Now, we need to ensure that all of this work is not limited just to our Canadian space, and this is why we've been delegated from our national board for holding and advocating Canada on the global stage for our work in the advanced air mobility world. This is coming out of both our engagements with the Dubai Air Show, representing Canada at one of the largest forums in the Middle East, and similarly at the Singapore Air Show to ensure that Canada continues to have a space to be represented both nationally and internationally as we grow and hold our space on the global stage. More locally, we're putting our full weight behind our launching of our partnership with the United Nations International Civil Aviation Organization to invite the world to Canada under their inaugural Advanced Air Mobility 2024 Symposium. This will be an opportunity to bring not only the Director Generals of Civil Aviation authorities around the world, our senior officials and policymakers, but also our industry to come to Canada under the banner of ICAO and showcase our ecosystem, our progress, and our vision for how this industry looks across the country. So with that and some of the initial introduction, we look forward to bringing up more of the CAAM 2.0 pillars throughout our second quarter of this year. But most importantly to these town halls, we're going to continue the conversation with some of our key experts, specifically starting with Jeannie Stewart-Smith, our Manager and Senior Policy Advisor, RPAS Policy for Transport Canada, to the stage to give us some of our AAM regulatory updates. So Jeannie, we'll welcome you up to the stage and we'll make sure we have everything set up here. But thank you so much again for taking the time today in being with us and giving us some of the updates on the international and local AAM policy.
Perfect. Thank you so much, JR. Just a quick audio check. You can hear me?
You're all good on that side. So I'll let you pass on the stage on this side.
Wonderful, thank you. And so David has very kindly offered to pull up my slides for me because as we all know, technology will fail you when you need it most. So PowerPoint is having a small meltdown on my side. So thank you so much, David, for having the foresight to have backup copies of the slides. And thank you, JR and team, for kicking off this town hall series. I think this is going to be a really important forum for us to exchange information. And as you'll probably see throughout my presentation, if there's anything we've learned in working in the RPAS and advanced air mobility space over the last 6+ years, it's that communication is essential to success. We all need to know what everyone else is doing in a fast-moving space, and you all need to know what we as Transport Canada are doing as the regulator. So by way of quick introduction, for those that I haven't met, I do see some familiar faces on the participants list, but I'm Jeannie Stewart-Smith, as JR introduced. My official title is Manager and Senior Policy Advisor of RPAS Policy, Regulations and Outreach, but that very much includes advanced air mobility as of the spring of 2023. We'll get into a little bit more about where I and my team play in the AAM space within Transport Canada. What I wanted to share with you today in the space that we have is a couple of priorities for 2024. So David, if we could move to the first slide. And I'm going to share with you sort of the big picture in terms of what Transport Canada is thinking with respect to advanced air mobility. There's a lot here and there's a lot more we can dig into. So I expect this to be the first of many conversations we have on this subject, and I'm really looking forward to that. But in terms of our focus for 2024, you're going to see some of this echoes what JR shared. And so we're really looking at advancing work in 4 key areas: on the international stage, at home with domestic stakeholders. The third pillar is really around learning. I have continued to build the evidence base on the slide, but it's really about kind of collectively building our understanding of what advanced air mobility is going to look like in Canada, where the technology is at and where it's going, and how that is going to or not fit into our regulatory framework. And then finally, the fourth priority, while it may not seem exciting to you, it's really important for us as Transport Canada to be organized internally in such a way that we can better respond to stakeholders, provide you with consistent information and guidance, and keep you up to date as to what's happening with us. So I'll move right into the international piece first. So David, if we can go to the next slide, please. Excellent, thanks. So JR referenced the exciting event that's coming up at ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization, in September. We're really looking forward to that. It's going to be the first event of its kind, but it's not the first AAM work going on at ICAO. So behind the scenes, excuse me, in 2023, ICAO set up a study group to look at advanced air mobility issues. This study group consists of representatives from over 30 countries and associations. So we have a lot of really excellent expertise spanning sort of regulators, ANSPs, associations, and industry members as well. So we really have a diverse set of views sitting at that table. And the mandate of this study group is to develop recommendations for ICAO with respect to AAM. So effectively, coming back to ICAO and saying, this is where we're going to need amendments to existing international rules. We're going to need new international rules. We're going to need international guidance. This is really the forum for regulators, industry to provide to ICAO that guidance and those recommendations for a way forward, so that ultimately ICAO can prioritize their activities and play in the AAM space in a way that responds to regulator and industry needs. The core of this work is focused on 3 working groups. And we are, Transport Canada, supporting sort of across the board on these working groups. But I want to highlight for you today what's called the Vision Working Group. And that's a really important piece of work here, in that the goal of that working group is to develop a global vision for advanced air mobility. Once we've set that global vision for advanced air mobility, the key next activity is going to be to conduct a gap analysis. So once we have sketched out what we expect the future to look like, the team is going to look at, well, how does that compare with the way international rules for aviation are set up now? And again, how is that going to work or not work? And that'll yield the recommendations for either new or amended rules or guidance from ICAO going forward. So that's a really important piece of work, and is going to really support a sort of harmonized approach to regulating in the advanced air mobility space. The other 2 working groups under the study group are the Explorer working group and the Guidance working group. Explorer has been tasked with sort of doing a bit of a deeper dive into anything that's kind of new and novel that the study group feels it needs more information on. So a key area of activity for them in the first sort of iteration of that working group was to look at sort of the state of the union with respect to autonomous operations. And then the Guidance working group is going to be working on a very early guidance for those sort of first expected advanced air mobility operations. So piloted eVTOL operations, working within the existing air traffic management systems. And that work was just kicked off at the last meeting. So I expect to get a good update from the Guidance working group at the upcoming May meeting, in which I can pass on to this community, because I think that'll probably be of interest in terms of where ICAO guidance is going for early operations. And I have the pleasure of being the Canadian member on the study group, supported by a broad range of technical and policy advisors. As you can imagine, the subjects tackled by the study group are very wide-ranging, and they do encompass kind of everything from strategic direction to some of the more technical details we need to work through. So that's an important and exciting area of work, and it really is picking up steam since our first meeting in May 2023. There's a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of recognition of the importance of international harmonization moving forward, and we really do have some great people around the table there. Go to the next slide, please. We also have been supporting, since our team was stood up in 2017, we've been supporting the ICAO RPAS panel, which does some related work that might be of interest to this audience. They have been working on standards and recommended practices for international IFR, aerodrome to aerodrome RPAS operations. And those SARPs, those international rules will come out as amendments to annexes scheduled to be delivered in 2026 and then 2030. The other area of interest that's been discussed over at the RPAS panel over the last year in particular is how ICAO is going to look at operations over the high seas for smaller non-certified RPAS. And that's of interest to some Canadian stakeholders with respect to environmental monitoring, ice monitoring off the flights off the front of ships for the purposes of ice monitoring and ice breaking, as well as oil rig inspections. So we're actively involved in those discussions as well to figure out an internationally harmonized solution to allowing those types of operations. And my colleague, Craig Block-Hansen, is the member on the RPAS panel, supported again by a series of technical and policy advisors. And I don't have it on this slide, but another really important area of work of interest to you is that we support as well the development of standards and recommended practices for vertiports under a different area of panel work. And that is supported by another one of my colleagues. And so we are actively monitoring that work as well. We'll turn our attention next to the domestic priority area. So if we can go to the next slide, please, David. Great, thank you. So some of you may know, and I think we have our former industry co-chair on the line today, but we ran what was called the Canadian Drone Advisory Committee from 2021 to 2023. And that was set up as a stakeholder body to specifically talk about issues of interest to the industry and advanced thinking and priority areas for the committee. And so we did some early work on advanced air mobility through that committee, as well as some work on research and development priorities and some work on the broader question of social acceptance with respect to sort of emerging drone technologies. So building on the lessons learned from what we affectionately called CANADAC in the first round of that advisory committee, we are looking to launch a second iteration of this committee in the spring of this year. And again, the idea here is to work closely with stakeholders to develop recommendations for a way forward for AAM that is specific to Canada. So again, I think you're going to hear me echoing some of the things that JR has said, but what we're seeing globally is that AAM is emerging around the world, but it's emerging around the world in different ways and with different priority areas. And so some countries may see urban air mobility as the logical first step for AAM, and some countries may be looking more at regional air mobility or other forms of advanced air mobility as sort of the key first steps based on their specific market, geography, technology readiness levels, et cetera. So we really want to make sure we develop a strategy for AAM in Canada that's based on how we expect AAM to evolve here at home. So we really want to work closely with stakeholders to kind of develop that path forward. And we had issued a call out for interested participants for the new advisory committee. And we are now wading through 75 plus excellent applications that are being assessed. And we're finalizing the approach for the committee, and we will be sharing more with you in the coming months. You can go to the next slide, please. So then shifting over to the internal piece, as we've had a team dedicated to RPAS work, so remotely piloted aircraft systems, at Transport Canada since 2017. That team was initially set up to advance small RPAS policy regulations and programs, small being sort of under 25 kilograms, and then quickly shifted our focus once we had our first set of rules issued in 2019, quickly shifted our focus to beyond visual line of sight operations in lower risk environments. And we have proposed amendments to our rules in June 2023 to push that piece of work forward. And we're looking to finalize those rules by the end of 2024. As advanced air mobility has sort of emerged in a very real way over the last couple of years, it didn't really fit sort of nicely with existing Transport Canada organizational structures. And it presents new challenges for a regulator that really cut across our existing functional areas. And so while that may sound like a Transport Canada problem, I think the key thing for stakeholders was that people were wanting to know from Transport Canada, well, what's the approach to AAM and where can I get information on AAM? And they weren't sure where to go within the department. And they were maybe getting different answers from different parts of the department and not necessarily getting that sort of big picture view. And so the organization decided in the spring of last year to establish an advanced air mobility integration team. So that's where myself and my team come into play. So we'll go to the next slide, please, David. Great. So as an AAM integration team, as the name sort of suggests, our role is really around integrating the approach to advanced air mobility within Transport Canada and with key partners. So we're focusing our activity areas around what we affectionately call the 3 C's: the convene, the coordinate, and the communicate. So convene is about bringing the right stakeholders to the table and also participating in great events like this one so that we can have the right discussions with the right people to make progress on key issues. We're also taking on a role with respect to coordination internally. So my team will be working with across sort of functional lines within Transport Canada, working with our technical experts, working in particular with some of our colleagues who are online from our national aircraft certification teams and our standards teams to make sure that all of those pieces that we're looking at, whether it's airworthiness or airspace or pilot licensing or vertiport, that we're moving that work forward in a way that is coordinated and is starting to form a coherent picture for the future of AAM in Canada. And then finally, to be the broken record about communication, it's really important for us and it's our responsibility to get that information back out to all of you so that you know what progress Transport Canada is making, you know where we have answers, where we're still working on answers, and what the grand plan is going forward. So that last C is really important about external communication. But I would also say that it's just as important for sort of all of you, anyone interested in advanced air mobility in Canada, to communicate with us. And I have our contact information on our last slide, but to reach out to us if you want to discuss, whether it's through these forums or others, to really talk about advanced air mobility, talk about what the landscape is like in Canada, please reach out to us. You can go to the next slide, please, David. Perfect. So short-term objectives for this integration team has been to launch and communicate this sort of single window for TC's advanced air mobility activities. So as I mentioned earlier, we're starting to see sort of requests for information and advice and guidance come in through different parts of the department. So we're now sort of funneling that through a more centralized office. And part of that early work was last year, we launched the first advanced air mobility webpage, which will continue to build up as there is more content and more to share on those web pages. So that'll be a key area to keep an eye on. And that URL is at the bottom of our nice enabling innovation graphic on the left side of the screen. We also have a couple email addresses that I'll share with you at the end of the presentation, where you can reach both my team as the AAM integration team, but also you can reach out directly to my certification colleagues. But either way, reach out to us and we'll point you in the right direction within Transport Canada and we'll get answers to your questions. We talked a little bit already about the stakeholder engagement mechanisms. So setting up that domestic stakeholder advisory committee so that we can get all of that great Canadian expertise feeding into Transport Canada's approach and strategy, but also better communicating, coordinating throughout the federal family from a federal government perspective, and then other levels of government as well. So as much as aviation is a federally regulated activity, we know that advanced air mobility is going to have local impacts and regional interests. And so, working with our colleagues in other levels of government is going to be important as well. So that'll be an area of focus for us this year as well. We touched on the AAM study group already, so I won't get into that, but also working with our colleagues again in National Aircraft Certification, developing criteria for type certification of AAM aircraft, thinking about that from a Canadian perspective, but also, again, having those important international conversations so that the world is moving forward in a harmonized way. And then we're going to develop a strategic plan for the future. So many of you will know that Transport Canada has a drone safety strategy to 2025. And 2025 is rapidly staring us in the face. And so we, had always planned to set up another 5-year strategy that sets out Transport Canada's kind of priority areas of work in this space for the next 5 years. So we've started to look at that, what a strategy to 2030 would look like, but recognizing the sort of very longer lead times on some of this work. How do we set up a 5-year strategy such that it kind of leads into a 10, 15, 20-year strategy as well? So those are some of the questions we're thinking about, and we'll have more to share with you as well in the coming months. And we can go to the next slide, please, David. Great. So those I've covered sort of the priority areas of work. And the last thing I wanted to do before I close out the presentation is just to give you a quick sneak peek into an upcoming study that we've done on advanced air mobility public opinion research. So we've seen, internationally that many of our colleagues in other jurisdictions have done similar studies to kind of try and gauge how the public feels about advanced air mobility, and to proactively identify potential barriers to growth in this space. And so we wanted to do sort of a signal check in terms of whether the Canadian public sort of follows those international trends that we're seeing, or whether there are sort of specific Canadian concerns. So we've been working with a marketing company for the last 9 months on developing this public opinion research report. They did a lot of really interesting focus groups, including a lot of work online to really try and get at the sort of average Canadian's point of view. And you'll see that we found some interesting things. I don't think anything that would surprise maybe anyone in this audience, but certainly I think some food for thought for all of us. And this report will be publicly available in the coming months. We're in the final stages of reviews before it can get published, but all public opinion research is made publicly available. So we'll certainly share that with this community when that comes out. But in terms of a sneak peek for today, nothing surprising, but I think there's some cautious optimism about how AAM could revolutionize transportation. The perceived benefits of advanced air mobility, again, probably not a surprise to anyone, or certainly not to me, having worked in this space for a while, but really focused on emergency response, medical services, and connecting our remote and rural areas better into sort of urban centers, and better just sort of into supply chains in general. And the concerns sort of ran the spectrum. The focus areas were really around safety, security, and privacy. Those were the top 3. And then followed sort of close behind by affordability, noise, and environmental impacts. So that's why we've categorized the sort of reaction as cautious optimism, because there's, I think, a recognition of potential, but then tempered perhaps by making sure that the regulatory environment and this sort of confidence in the technology exists. And so there's a couple of kind of interesting statistics that I'll share with you just out of interest. Again, you'll be able to see this, and we can do a more fulsome briefing in the future if that's of interest. But of the people who participated in this research, most Canadians had never heard about advanced air mobility before. So 77%, that's a pretty high number. I don't think we're terribly surprised about that. We live and breathe this topic within my team at Transport Canada. But when I talk to other people about it, they're not necessarily maybe as aware of the potential here and where the technology is going. But we thought that was pretty interesting. And so less than a quarter of Canadians have heard of advanced air mobility before. Again, we characterize support as conditional, strong, but conditional support of AAM. So it sort of depends on how the technology emerges and how it's applied in Canada. And so what we'll do is, as I mentioned, we'll send those reports out as soon as they are publicly available. They will be available online as well if you are interested. And I know there is some interesting work going on in this space as well, in some universities and with some other organizations as well. So we're hoping all of this can continue to build on our collective understanding of social acceptance of advanced air mobility, and making sure that we kind of hear the concerns of Canadians and take that into account as we move forward. And with that, I think the next slide, David, is our stay in touch slide. So this is my call to you, is connect with us. Again, through participating in these great town halls, or whether you want to contact us directly, you can connect with the AAM team through those email addresses. We'll work on some kind of QR code or something that's a little less wordy, so that you can get that contact information. Please feel free to reach out to me directly. And I would encourage you to sign up for our team's monthly Drone Zone newsletter. Please don't be dissuaded by the title. It does include advanced air mobility updates, but that we put that out monthly, and it gives you kind of a sense of where Transport Canada's at in terms of regulatory development, new guidance, participation in events, call outs for participation in different activities. But that's a great way to keep tabs on what we're up to. So with that, thank you, JR, for the time. I think I went a little bit over, but happy to take questions. And as we've talked about, I think this is the beginning of a very good and long conversation.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
And then Jeannie, greatly appreciated for that first part of this conversation, expanding in that consistent space that we're trying to create for these updates as we're working together live. Both the development within TC and ensuring that's integrated within the global ecosystem as well. So just going to bring up some of the questions that came up in the Q&A during the session. Both Eugene and Jean-Marc Leflamme had the questions regarding how do we stay engaged and contact the Transport Canada team as well as that committee side. So we'll make sure that those are shared out both in the summary email as well as some of the slides to be followed up both online as a result of that. So just wanted to re-emphasize the engagement piece has been an important question, continue to come up there. I just want to bring some of the awareness, Jeannie, and you spoke about this as well. The work that Transport Canada is doing on both the international side, playing that role at ICAO, taking it in and intertwining that with the drone and RPAS work under the ACFA, and the importance of the AAM integration team. We know these are immense challenges at the federal level, and we're seeing the conversation start to bubble up across the ecosystem. How do we take that next step in your point of view from both the federal side and getting it to our grassroots tangible operations as we look at more of these popping up across the next 5 years?
You're going to get a broken record response from me, JR, but communication, I think that's staying in touch with sort of the entire, as you call it, ecosystem, is going to be so important in this work going forward. We've learned that through experience working in the small RPAS space over the last 6 years. There's really no way for us as a regulator to operate effectively in this environment without staying in close touch with where industry is going, with where the technology is going, with where Canadians' perceptions are going, and really sort of wrapping that all up into, and don't laugh when I say as quickly as possible, but we are a government after all. But wrapping that up into developing policy, regulations, and programs as quickly as possible. And so, having conversations and taking the time to connect with the right people is going to be so important to success. So again, thank you for organizing these town halls. I think it's going to be a great way to continue to build the network.
And it's one start. We know there's many pieces still to come, but it's going to be that consistent space on a quarterly basis that we can gather, disseminate that information, gather the insights from the industry, from the ecosystem to present back to yourselves and the other national authorities and ensure that that progress can be made. We know the other big piece that you mentioned is leading into that update on the national strategy. What is that going to mean for Transport Canada and for the ecosystem when we can have a unifying vision to support and get behind as well?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of, I think, key things there about having that sort of long-term vision and strategy. One of them is really to help like Transport Canada prioritize our areas of work, right? Because right now, if we look at sort of everything that's emerging in aviation, there's a lot. There's a lot coming out, and it's all really amazing and innovative and wonderful, and pushing towards sustainability in the sector. And we are limited in not being able to do everything all at once. No one can do everything all at once. And so, having these discussions, having that long-term strategy about where we think AAM is going to go specific to Canada, like taking into consideration our geography, our market, our people, what can really serve Canadians the best, will help TC prioritize where we put our efforts in terms of, identifying regulatory gaps if there are some, putting in place better guidance, figuring out how to type certify those first aircraft. All of that will help us focus our efforts and move in closer lockstep with where industry wants to go. So I think that's one really, really important part of having that longer term strategy. And I think it also helps to point us all in the same direction. And then bring that sort of same direction to the international stage. Yeah. So when I talked about, ICAO wanting to develop a global AAM vision, it's really important for me as the member of the AAM study group to make sure that that global vision reflects Canadian realities. And that in turn is going to impact how ICAO regulates or not in this space. And that, getting in there early and having those discussions early and making sure Canada's represented well is going to be really important, so that when ICAO does issue regulations, guidance, et cetera, in this space, that it makes sense in the Canadian context and we can easily bring it back home because we've provided those Canadian inputs up front.
That's it. And I'm just going to acknowledge as well, this is the gap that we know exists between the pace of industry and the pace of our regulatory authorities and government. That just exists. Why we are also leaning into these conversations to start reducing that gap as massive capital investments are starting to occur for both aircraft purchase orders, involvements of infrastructure, involvements of new technology coming in. So now we have the tangibility moving us to fill that gap and progress it forward. And this is also just for all of our attendees here today. This is kind of jumping to the call to action that we want to make sure goes out through this quarter. What are those priorities that we need as the industry to strongly communicate towards our national authorities? How do we start giving guidance of where our capital decisions, operational decisions will be made in this next 1 to 2 years that can help guide this national strategy? So kind of jumping ahead on that to Jeannie for the outreach is just putting some of the insight for the call to actions there. Just looking at the last little bits here before we transition off to Michel for some of our funding conversations. But we know there's still many areas that need to be addressed. You talked about the AAM integration team pulling all of the different departments within Transport Canada. Mm-hmm. Where do you still see where we are currently under-resourced or underfunded for some of those near-term challenges?
I like that question, JR. I think to give ourselves some credit, I think that we've pivoted some resources to focus on the advanced air mobility space, and as I mentioned, I get to be here presenting kind of on behalf of the sort of AAM team at Transport Canada. It is multiple, people in different technical expertise areas, different policy and regulatory making areas who are contributing to this discussion. And I think that I would say maybe the only sort of gap that I see or I saw maybe right now is what you're filling, here is sort of this communication piece, this consistent space for these discussions to happen. And I think we're starting to see that emerge. I think that the community as a whole is responding. I think we're seeing that on the international level. We're seeing conversations pick up at a very accelerated pace. We're seeing more domestic conversations happening. We're starting to make the right connections. I think if we continue to build on that, that'll be our greatest strength. And I think otherwise, I think Canada has a lot of aerospace expertise. We've now got sort of a team ready and willing to kind of work on this longer term strategy. So I think we're well positioned overall, but I think we need to kind of continue putting the emphasis on communication and learning and really moving forward together in 2024 in that sort of coherent way where we are sharing information as much as possible, recognize there are always limitations to that, but giving us a sense again of concretely where the industry wants to go. That's going to be an essential piece in terms of prioritization and our ability to be responsive to industry needs.
Well, I think this is going to be a perfect transition into more of those opportunities on that tangibility coming, as Michel will give insights to the $350 million fund that we know the Beta and Helijet is acting as a tip of the spear for some of the excitement that we envision throughout this conversation and the developments of the industry. So Jeannie will continue to have this space available for Transport Canada and all the great work coming from across your team. Thank you for being here today and the start of the conversation. And we look forward to replicating this space on a quarterly basis with the ecosystem.
Great. Thank you for the time.
Wonderful. And now I wanted to continue our conversation with Michel Dion, the Director General of the Initiative for Sustainable Aviation Technologies, or INSAT, to come and give just some of the insight on both not only the launch of this $350 million fund, focused on activating and giving us more of those tangible options for projects in the future of aviation, but how that is going to expedite and rapidly bring more insight and tangibility to our operations here in Canada. So Michel, welcome, bonjour. Thank you so much for being with us. I'll pass the stage on to yourself.
Thank you very much, JR. And hello, everyone, bonjour. Thank you first to JR and the team at CAAM for inviting me to this event. And I will also say bravo to Jeannie for a very insightful presentation that we just had. And I agree, this is a very important event that CAAM is putting together with those meetings. So thank you very much. As JR presented me, I'm the Director General of the Initiative for Sustainable Aviation Technology. It's a new consortium that has been formed last November, so it's pretty new, but we've been some funding members working on it for the past 2.5 years to set this up. Myself, I joined the organization just past January, so it's very recent. A little bit to present myself, just for you to know where I come from. Before that, I was working for Bell Textron Canada, or formerly Bell Helicopter, for 17 years. There, I was in charge of the innovation team, managing innovation projects for about 10 years. I've been involved in many of the initiatives in Canada for developing innovations and conducting R&D activities such as CREAC, CARIC, Garden, SAGE. You probably name all of them over the past 10 years, and I was involved either on the board of directors, scientific committees, and or leading projects inside those organizations. Prior to Bell, I worked for now who is L3 Harris, at the time was L3 Communications, Military Aircraft Services. I led projects supporting the CF-18 fleet for the Canadian Armed Forces. And prior to that, I have a degree from the Royal Military College of Canada in '96 in space sciences. So you see, my background is industry, and the intent here for INSAT I'll be presenting you is that we conduct R&D, we conduct innovation work, but ultimately we do that to transform into outputs for the industry to make new products and new services for the ecosystem. Just check here, JR, you can still see the presentation.
You're all good there, Michel?
Good, excellent, thank you. So we have an opportunity here, and it has been mentioned a few times already this morning. There's a target of reaching net zero emissions by the year of 2050. We know today that the air travel is growing at a faster pace than the improvements we can make on the aircraft to reduce the emissions. Even the ICAO predicts that global aviation emissions could triple by 2050 if we don't do nothing. So we need to change. We need to have a paradigm shift through technology injection to developing clean fuels and improve our operations of aircraft. So Canada, we can take the lead. We're already a leader in aerospace. You know all of that. But we can take that lead as developing those technologies and introducing them into the economy. We have a diverse aerospace sector in Canada. We have a wealth of natural resources, and we have world-class talent. And this is something I think that we should be very proud of, and that could be foundational for developing those technologies of the future. So how can we do that? The success will be tied to a strong industry-led partnership that working with the government to unlock that full potential of Canadian strength. So we don't have the level of funding that Europe can have or the US can have. But one thing that we can do is working together at developing those technologies and introducing them into future product and services. So this message we've been pushing on it for many years. And in June last year, the Minister Champagne of ISED announced at Paris Air Show a new initiative of to lead an investment of $350 million to develop a national sustainable aviation network. So basically what became INSAT. So what's the raison d'être? What's the purpose of INSAT? Well, we can see it from first, I was just talking about government funding. So you see at the bottom of this chart there, must not be seen as a subsidy, must be seen as a partnership, a true partnership between government and the industry, that we are sharing the risk, that we are sharing the work in developing those technologies. Because when we go in production with those technologies, that we're all going to benefit of those of that economy, of those well-paid jobs, and created the highly talented people workforce with those research projects. So it's truly a collaboration between the industry, the government, and also the academic institutions and the research centers that we're creating. To the left side of this chart, you see green aviation technology projects. So we have the main purpose of INSAT is to support research projects that we're going to conduct across the country. And I'll come back to what those projects will be. But this is a major input to what INSAT will be, that network will be. And then another thing that is added to that is the access to demonstrator platforms. So flight simulators, labs, but we're looking at large scale platforms. So we're working with the NRC, the Flight Research Lab. We'll be working with companies who may have today demonstration platforms that they'd like to put to the availability of the network, basically. And INSAT, we're going to be facilitating the access to those demonstration platform. So at the end, the output of all of this is that we want to drive to that zero emission aviation that we're targeting for 2050. We want to develop, yes, the technologies, but the skills of the future is very important. Today, we don't have the engineers and technicians and certification delegates to develop electric propulsion systems. We have experimental aircraft, we have projects on that, but how going design that in the future. We need to develop those skills and how we're going to maintain those platforms and make the production as well. So this is part also of the INSAT mandate. And then we want to protect, exploit, and monetize that IP that will be made in, available in the future. So we have 4 pillars under INSAT. One is hybrid alternative propulsion. And I won't read through all the details here. You can see them, but just to give a few examples here. So hybrid alternative propulsion, we're talking about the all-electric or the hybrid electric propulsion system, the powertrains, the batteries, the fuel cells. We're already receiving today project proposals on hydrogen propulsion systems. Also, the aircraft architecture and systems. If we change the shape of the aircraft, maybe we can reduce the amount of energy needed to fly, then reducing the consumption of fuel. So this is an area that we're going to be also supporting. Green manufacturing technologies is one aspect. So it's not only the aircraft flying, but it's also how do we make the aircraft. So when we look at the industry, it's holistically, we're looking at it from when we start building the aircraft to when we fly it to when we dispose of it. Clean fuels transition, the SAF, Sustainable Aviation Fuel, the hydrogen, something we're going to be looking at, not only from a standpoint of using the fuel aboard the aircraft, but how do we get that SAF, that fuel to the aircraft? So the intent is not necessarily to be funding the pipelines that can be needed for bringing the SAF up to the airport. But if there's technology that could be developed to help doing that in a more efficient way, well, that's something that INSAT could be looking at. And also infrastructure operations, technologies, airport as well, same thing. It's not necessary to be supporting the building a new hangar, but if there's a technology that needs to be developed that is not off the shelf, that could be helping to reduce the emissions of operating that hangar, well, that's something that we may be interested to support, or we be capable to support. And some of the AI applications also that we can see into this area. So to start this consortium, as I've been saying earlier, we started about 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago to work on this. We started making calls across the country, and we received about more than 100 letters of support and saying, yes, we would like to work with INSAT or have projects funded with INSAT. So you see here is a non-exhaustive chart of the country showing where we have capabilities. We know that there's research being conducted and production being conducted in BC for hydrogen. We know that there's SAF projects being developed in the prairies. We know that there's electric project propulsion system projects out of the Maritimes. So across the country, there are a wealth of opportunities for partnering and developing the technologies of the future. And this is exactly what INSAT's mandate is to go across the country and make those connections to make sure that by working together, we can move faster. So I mentioned about the 2.5, 3 years ago. So we have here the funding members. Those are 3C, CAE, Bell, Pratt, Bombardier, and de Havilland. So those companies came together to establish the scope, to start the conversation with the government, establish the funding level that would be needed to kickstart INSAT. And today they are represented on the interim board of directors that I see here till the end of 2023, but I should say mid-24 at this point. So we're at a stage now that INSAT, we're ramping up. We have 5 director positions that are open. One is already filled, the director of programs. We'll have one for contracts and IP. We'll have one for Finance will have one for communications and business development, and one for business operations. So once we have an organization that is set around May timeframe, we're going to hold a general assembly meeting. And this will be basically the transition from the interim board of director with those players that you see here on the screen to a permanent board of director. And this permanent board of director, we have in our contribution agreement with ICAO a matrix that basically states that we need to have representation from across the country. We need to have a representation across the organization mandate. So whether it's OEM, small, medium enterprise, academic institution, research center. Also, we need to have independent people on the board who will be from organization, not seeking for any of the funding. So we have a complex matrix like this. And we have also a mandate of parity as well, men and women. So today, the current chairperson of the board, Walter Di Bartolomeo, who is a retiree from Pratt, is putting together this, what could look like this future permanent board. And this will be presented and voted at the General Assembly meeting around end of May. So I will say here, if you're interested to contribute, be on that board, to let me know, or if you know Walter Di Bartolomeo, you can contact him directly. So he's these days gathering interest from across the country to be sitting on that board. One thing important to understand is that compared to other consortia that you might have seen in the past, once we have transitioned into a permanent board of director, and we will basically transition from a ramp up mode of the organization to a continuous operation. Well, those funding members will become regular members without any special privilege. So that's very important to understand here, if maybe different from other consortia that you could have seen. So I mentioned a little bit about the organization, something also a bit different from other consortia that you might have seen. So we're a not-for-profit entity. So I'm the DG reporting directly to the board of director. We're gonna have 5 directors reporting to the DG, as you see on the screen here. Those 6 people in blue will be the permanent staff of INSAT, and we're going to be working with a service provider, a company put under contract for the workforce, basically, who you see in green. So where we're going to have project managers, and we're going to have staff supporting finance, administration, and also communications. The way we select projects, so we have an independent committee led by someone in BC, and basically we have a list of about 30 potential evaluators for projects with different skills and expertise. And when we receive the projects, we look at the projects, and if we see that it's a project related to, let's say, hydrogen, well, we're going to go through the list and start contacting potential evaluators for those projects. We're going to have 3 evaluators per project. And we're going to form the committee on that basis. This committee is totally independent from the board of director and from the INSAT organization. So it's very important to understand. So at the end, when we get the approval from the board, it's basically saying that the process has been followed. And yes, the amount of funding that is proposed by the committee fits into the amount allowable by the organization, so that we have good finance. But other than that, all the responsibility of selecting projects reside with that independent project selection committee. The governance designed for responsiveness, impartiality, and scalability. Scalability is important here because the way it has been set, if you heard, about 2 years ago, we were working on a mandate from AIAC and ISAT called Gateway. So basically, INSAT is the first step to be developing the Gateway strategy initiative with the AIAC. So this is why we're talking about scalability, because this organization could be growing or could be adapted to support this future initiative, and CAAM has been part of those conversations with for developing the gateway. So you see here the aircraft Cessna 337 from NRC, the hybrid electric. This is an example of platform that I was mentioning earlier that INSAT could help get access to with funding for the projects. But just going back to, now that you have an idea of what INSAT is, just to go back on what the vision is, it's to expedite the Canadian aerospace towards environmental sustainability. And our mission is to coordinate and accelerate the development of green aviation technologies in Canada. So just looking at this here, you can see already complementary with the vision and mission of CAAM. And this is why we're going to be continuing to work together on this. So mentioned already about a little bit of the outcomes and objectives. Just a word on the IP. I think it's important to mention that INSAT will not retain any IP. The IP will reside with the organizations who will have developed that IP. We're just there to make sure that we coordinate between the partners and that we have a strategy for monetizing eventually that IP. Sorry, we're talking about also a multi-sectorial organization. So yes, we're aerospace, but when we talk about batteries, when we talk about hydrogen and so many other technologies, we know that other industries are also looking at that. So we want to be inclusive and working with those other sectors to accelerate the development for aerospace. We're looking for collaboration between academic institutions, universities, and we say here especially small and medium enterprises. So it's important to mention that for a project, we need to have a partnership of 2 organizations, out of which one must be an SME. So one of the goal of INSAT is to make stronger the value chain of our Canadian economy, and this is basically through making stronger our SMEs. And INSAT has that for mandate. So each project that INSAT will be funding will have one SME as a partner. It's good to develop technologies for green applications and reduce carbon footprint, etc. But also we want to make it an opportunity to grow the economy for the country, and we want to create jobs, retain jobs as well, and attract the younger generations to our so beautiful and passionate industry that is aerospace. So at the end, we want Canada to be a leader in the fight of the climate change. So mentioned already a bit about the parameters. First, partner needs to be a member of INSAT. Today, before you may ask the question, we're still working on that membership. We need to put a small agreement together, etc., to become a member. So this will be coming in for in the next few weeks online on the website. The project criteria, impact towards net zero emissions aviation, and I would say in the broader view to reduce the environmental footprint of our industry. We need to see a feasible path to commercialization, because we're doing that we can have the best technology in the world, being like zero emission, but if it doesn't go into production, if we don't have customers buying those products, well, it will have no impact on the climate. So we need to have that path to commercialization. TRL range, looking from 3, that is to be demonstrated in a lab environment, to 7, so in a representative environment. In some cases, we can accept up to TRL2, but it's because we're seeing rapid growth through the TRLs. We need to see at least one increment of TRL level with the project, and as I mentioned a few times already, needs to have at least one SME part of the partnership. Funding, we're talking up to 40% of the eligible cost. Some exceptional case could see 50%. And for academic institutions, we can see up to 100%. And it's a maximum of $10 million of contribution. So if you do the math, if you had 40% of eligible costs, we're talking projects the size of 24-ish million, the maximum. And also not mentioned here, we're looking for projects maximum duration of 3 years. So that funding we have for INSAT goes up to August 2030. So we have about 6 years in front of us. So that's why 3 years, it gives the opportunity to do more than one project in series. So those are the information here. Don't hesitate to go see on the website. We have a webinar the slides of a webinar that we did in January. So with more slides, that here you have the executive briefing today. But if you go on the website, you'll have more information about how to propose a project to INSAT, how we're doing the selection, etc. In terms of dates, and in terms maybe of I mentioned about where we're at into setting up the organization, but in terms of projects, when we were putting the program together, the funding members, we knew that when we were going to be, we would sign with ICAO, we did not want to wait months and a year to receive project proposals and already being 1 year late. So in parallel, we have developed what we call the shovel-ready projects. So when we signed with ICAO in November, we already had a number of projects in the pipeline, so that today we have 6 projects approved, and we have received 9 proposals in March. So we can see 15 projects in the pipeline. We have partners today going from Newfoundland to basically BC. So with those 6 projects, we're already pan-Canadian, and we want to make sure that we have projects that will come up from all the provinces, basically across the country. This needs to be truly a pan-Canadian initiative. And in terms of the next round of project, we don't have set a date yet, but the intent is to have 4 calls per year. So that would be around June timeframe that we would open to. Well, you can always send your proposals along the year, but the intent is that we have the selection committee meeting 4 times a year, so every 3 months ish. So you got the executive presentation. Hope it helps. You know where to find me, and JR. I'm ready for the fireside chat.
Excellent, Michel. Thanks for that overview on some of the important pieces of not only the partnership between INSAT and CAAM for being that funding partner for advancing these technologies, but ensuring that those 16 projects as the starting piece have the ripple effect into more applications coming in. So we have a lot of work still ahead, but this is going to be a space to continue to show what was still needed for funding across the industry, how our ecosystem can show up, and then we got a thumbs up on that side as well. But also what the needs are coming from our insight and guidance on the national strategy for then those projects to forward our initiatives.
Exactly.
So the first one that we have here, I know Gilbert has a good question in the chat as well, but you've seen some of the 16 projects come in so far, Michel. Where are there still challenges that are not being identified by the industry? What kind of gaps are we still seeing so far?
So today, most of the projects that we have received are on the aircraft side. So if you remember the four pillars I've shown, so in the advanced propulsion systems, we have received projects there. In the aircraft configuration architecture, we have received some projects there. On the SAF, we know that there are some projects in the making. So now in the future, we might be looking and focusing some of the calls on the airports and the operation side, because we're not necessarily looking at the balanced budget for the four pillars, like 25% for each. But we want to have activity, a certain amount of activity in each of them, because we need to see it holistically. So on the airport and infrastructure side and operations, this is where we might be putting a bit more of effort in the near future.
And so critical. And we know one of the leaders, Monette Pasher in the Canadian Airport Council team, has been a critical voice of just making sure our airports are briefed on their role of the sustainable aviation technology future, knowing that those capital budgets just don't add up on our conventional models. So critical opportunities there too.
So I plan to go meet with them next fall when they have their meeting.
Excellent. And I know Joshua just has a good question here too, but can you say more on the academic contribution? We know this is a big area for a lot of the research and development side to give us those future technologies. How has the academic institutions been showing up so far?
So most of the projects that we have received, we have academic institutions who are partners. And this is, we have some in BC already. I'm going on top of my head. We have some in BC, we have some in Ontario, we have some in Quebec at this point. So, so the idea is that most of the projects, I hope that we're going to have academic institutions as partners, because it will be critical to develop the skills of the future.
And that's, the important part. And Joshua, just for additional opportunities to connect from the academic side to SMEs, we're going to be continuing to amplify both the work that INSAT is doing as more of the public projects are announced, and then also some of those lead partners that are looking for collaboration. So this is where if you're as an SME or as the academic and looking for collaboration, this is going to be some of those opportunities to just make sure those connections are made.
Yep.
And as we look forward, Michel, so we're sitting here as kind of the first round of projects going out in that first call for proposal. What do you envision if you had to paint success as we report back in that Q2, Q3 town hall? What does success look like for INSAT and the development?
So, it's a multi-parameter answer. Sorry. So, number of projects for sure. We want to have as many projects as possible, and representing each region of the country, and that we have partnerships across the country, meaning provinces working together. So we have a partner in Saskatchewan working with a partner in Halifax, because not just because of geography, but because they found that complementarity that will allow them to move faster in the development of their technologies and their skills. The other thing also is to accelerate the development of technology. So today we see there's a lot of activity in Europe. There's a lot of activity in the US, as I was mentioning. They have a lot of money, but today we're still, like I'm so often asked, are we still in the race? Yes, we are, because none of that is certified yet, almost. None of that is in production or in large volume production. So we just need to move fast. And the only way of doing that is by working together. And the other thing is that we want to have a strong network of talents across the country. So when I'm saying that is and we still need to figure out how we're going to do that. But as I was mentioning, we have a list of potential evaluators, those who accepted to be evaluators for our projects. We have names coming from across the country, from coast to coast to coast. That's something to be reviewing a project once it has been written, and but we'd like to go upstream because our intent is not to refuse projects. We want all the projects to be funded and going on. When obviously the projects are bringing benefits and meeting the requirements. So before, let's say an SME who has never done that before, who has a technology of hydrogen, but can I install that into an aircraft? Would that make sense? Is there a technical feasibility? Well, that you have a network already existing that this person can pick up the phone or the Teams or the Zoom or and find somebody in Vancouver and say, "Hey, I'm thinking about proposing a project for INSAT, but I'd like to know if it makes sense this technology in an aircraft. Can you help me doing it?" So so that the day we receive a proposal, that this person had access to experts already across the country. So it's a network not only of organizations, but it's network of skills and knowledge, and so that will be a sign of success for sure.
Wonderful.
And I could go on with that for a long time, but want to make sure I cover all your questions.
Excellent. Well, we'll pause there and just express once again the funding mechanism of finally having that tangibility come from the idea of all these future new concepts to now playing out. This is the point that we're at. So grateful for the time here, Michel, and giving us some of the overview. And we'll have that consistent space for the updates, the insights, and where these funds are being deployed to advance our industry going forward.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. And anytime you can invite me, and I'll be glad to come back and provide update. And just as you were saying, if you've been in the industry for long enough, you know that we've been asking for this kind of funding for a long time. And this, what we see here, is historic. And I'm choosing my words carefully. This is historic. We're just starting something great, something big. So
that's it. So the call to action out to the attendees is not only are we going to have these projects still open for that second round, hopefully going to be occurring in June time, but also to look at the different positions to help amplify that network, and of course find collaboration opportunities for those project catalysts to continue to advance.
Thank you, JR. Thank you to the team. Thank you all.
Wonderful. Michel, once again, grateful. And thank you again, Jeannie Stewart-Smith from Transport Canada, for giving us that overview on the regulatory and policy side. We're going to conclude with some of our calls to actions just from bringing our entire conversation together. So number one, please find CAAM as your one-stop shop for the updates on your preferred digital channel, both email, website, or social media, so we can continue to be that advocate voice for our industry, towards our funding partners, towards our policy and regulatory development, and our national authorities. We will continue to provide this space on a quarterly basis with tangible updates from our national authorities. And number two, creating additional opportunities for the world to come to Canada under our different events. Our call out specifically is going to be for the ICAO event in Montreal. We'll be continuing to lean in giving you the space as the industry to showcase the great work that we have across our nation and find and collaborate with the global community. So from our entire CAAM team of David, Theo, and myself, thank you for taking a part of your day today and being a part of the solution of the industry we're trying to create. We wish you a great rest of your day and looking forward to the conversation continuing again soon. Thank you very much, everyone. Take care.